Okay, so I'm speaking about the new moon in Cancer, 20 July 2020. Here we go. It's here. It's the second new moon in Cancer of Cancer season. Kieran LaGrice has a book called The Archetypical Cosmos. This was published in 2011 by Flores Books. He writes well about the moon. He talks about the moon being the matrix of being, the private inner life. I always think of the moon as the mother, the home, the body. The moon rules Cancer, and so Cancer season, with two new moons in Cancer, it's saturating the lunar Cancerian energy. And it's just worth thinking about, how's your Cancer season been? I mean, have you taken care of your body? Are you nurturing your body? How's your nurturance? How's your home life? Can you carve out home in your body and your environment? Gareth Knight, in his book, A Practical Guide to Kabbalistic Symbolism, he writes about how the moon and the physiological cycle of women are related. And I think it's worth just mentioning that the moon rules the earth element via night triplicity rulership. And so when we look at the Capricorn Cancer axis, it's ruled by the moon. Both signs are. So there's this doubling up of the moon on this axis. And you can also think about the collective body, right? The collective unconscious, the deep structures of reality, both physical, emotional, and spiritual when we talk about the moon. Because the moon does signify the collective. And I think of Carl Jung here and his notion of the collective unconscious, that we're all connected and there's some kind of structure in the deep mind which we share. Jobs in the economy directly impact the home. And you have to make money or have money in order to build a home and protect a home. And the collective home, we might say that's the earth right now, is in the midst of huge alterations, changes that we haven't seen in decades or centuries. 26 December 2019, we had this lunar eclipse in early Capricorn at 4 Cap, with Jupiter right there. The South Node was still in Capricorn right in that first decan, and then Saturn was at 20 Cap. This sort of kicked off what we're dealing with, right? This is December, right when these changes started happening in terms of the upheaval with the crisis that we're currently in. By the time we got to the Aries ingress, it was in full swing. And remember, this is the triple conjunction of Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. There hasn't really been a triple conjunction within 7 degrees like that in long time. And with the South Node in Capricorn, it's actually, you have to go back to the fall of the Roman Empire, and that triple conjunction wasn't even that close in that chart. So it's this very tight winding and focused energy in the Capricorn part of the chart, and Cancer is opposite that, so it triggers that axis. We're now hitting it from the other side, from the Cancer side, with these two new moons. An eclipse back in June, remember the solar eclipse in Cancer, and now the second new moon, this one we're about to experience on 20 July. People out there are experiencing this, but look at here. Here's the Organization for Economic Development. They're saying urgent action is needed to stop the jobs crisis from becoming a social crisis. This is that Capricorn Cancer axis. Here's the World Bank. Strange that the World Bank would be speaking about health policy, but they have actually chimed in and they've said that this situation we're in presents a collective action problem that can only be solved by people coming together. And I do think that then the signification of the moon being the masses of people is part of what we're dealing with, this Cancer Capricorn axis, the people, the earth, the matrix of reality, the Gaian matrix. The last time we've had two new moons in the same solar season was in 2017 with the Great American Eclipse in Leo. I just mentioned that because it's important, right? But also in 2024, we're having another eclipse that runs through America and it makes a cross right in southern Illinois. And so that is kind of X marks the spot in terms of this crisis that America is going through. The Pluto return is also happening. All right, last year in 2019, we saw 2 full moons in Libra to kick off the spring. That was some nice energy. I remember that. I was in Prague. But looking back, that year was the top, so-called, of the old way of life, right? 2019 will always be remembered as this old way of life. We'll have nostalgia for 2019, probably for the rest of our lives, because this crisis doesn't seem to abate, and it will only abate from the installation of a whole new way of life, right? And Venus is being enjoyment, fun, etc. And so 2019, I think we might look back and just think about how much more fun you had in 2019 compared to 2020 in terms of the things we associate with fun generally, like going to concerts or having dinner with friends. That's over, right? That's been canceled. So but the point is here, sometimes we can look at a year, where are there 3 syzygies happening? in one solar season. Libra last year, this year Cancer. So focus was relationship and Venusian fun. This year the focus is the moon and the home. Saturn will be opposing by 13 degree minutes. It's an extremely tight applying opposition from Saturn, and Saturn rules that Egyptian term of the new moon. So while the moon rules Cancer, Saturn rules the Egyptian term. And Saturn is homelessness. Saturn is not having a home, being kicked out of your home. You got headlines talking about the crisis could cause homelessness in Arizona as the economy fails. You also see the Washington Post here had an article that an indicator that presaged the housing crisis is flashing red again, and that's new mortgage delinquencies, which hit a record in April. It's well above anything that's seen during the Great Recession. So we're in this crisis of crises right now in terms of housing. Also, Saturn is authority in government, and you see articles like out of the Boston Globe from the 16th of July saying that the legislature must act. There's a proposal by the governor, and that lawmakers can act to kind of stop the housing crisis. You also see story in the Atlantic that was earlier in July on the 15th that the fixing it shouldn't be complicated if Congress intervenes. And so there's this idea that the government stands in the way, and that's that Saturn opposition, right? Government in the way. It's unclear how it will be resolved, and I just really wish and hope for people that get to stay in their homes, for this crisis to be resolved soon, for governments to step up and do their jobs. The other thing is Saturn is ruled by Mars via Egyptian term, and so that actually gives a little bit more power right now to this Mars-Saturn square that we have, this sign-based cardinal square. Mars is in Aries, and Mars also squares the new moon and Mercury. And so it does bring Mars into this mix. And remember, Mars is incensement, is passion, is kind of action, is upheaval. Also, in the midst of what was an extremely difficult time for many people, sugarcoating is not the best take, and I certainly don't want to sugarcoat. But neither can we lose sight of the lessons available because of challenges. It's only through challenge that we learn lessons that serve us later. We learn how to handle things, right? And this is from Sue Tompkins. Her book, Aspects in Astrology. She says, squares are useful too because it is through meeting obstacles that we grow, either by refining our position or by making it stronger. And I think this quote can really be something we can pin on our mirrors or on our walls during this year of this cardinal squaring off and this cardinal pile up. There are lessons during this year that we're going to be able to learn and pull from. Oscar Wilde, this wonderful quote, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us are looking at the stars." This is what it feels like to be an astrologer in 2020. Everybody's been impacted by the crisis that we're in, but we can look up to the stars and maybe find hope or answers or inspiration. If you're not an astrologer, the idea is optimism. It's like even in the darkest of moments, there's still this beautiful teeming reality that's all around us. If we look at the new moon chart, it's cardinal heavy still. 6 of the planetary points are in cardinal signs. 6 out of the 7 traditional planets are in cardinal signs for this new moon. So it's very cardinal heavy. It's about initiations, beginnings. And I think we can think lessons in starting things or wanting to start things but not being able to because of the Saturn opposition. And it's elementally balanced. So you might have, whatever your elemental proclivity is, you probably have access to some of that work right now. The new moon is conjoined a fixed star. It's loose conjunction, so it's between 1 and 2 degrees, which it's not a direct hit fixed star conjunction, but still has some implication. This fixed star Aludra, it's the tail of Canis Major. And I just think it's an interesting metaphor here. If you've had dogs or been around dogs, they get happy and they wag that tail. That tail moves when they're excited and happy. And I think it's worth just saying, all right, we've got this really difficult new moon and this opposition to Saturn, but where can we wag our tail? Where can we get excited? Even if it's just a little bit every day. I mean, I like to just drink my green tea. I drink really strong Georgian green tea right now. Having that fresh green tea and just tasting it, it's my tail wags, but there's little things like that all throughout our day. If we go to Robson, he talks about exactly this, that the Aludra fixed star, those stars are like Venus, and it's said to give good qualities, charity, and a faithful heart. Okay, and that's what I think a dog best represents, is that faithful heart. The dog will always love you. And so what can we be faithful to and enjoy? Also, I want to say that Polaris is very, very close right now to the North Node, and it's only 6 degree minutes from the North Node. And the North Node is an eclipse point, like I said, so it blocks and corrupts, and Polaris is our guiding North Star. So, my delineation here is that the collective way ahead is as uncertain and confusing as it's been in my lifetime. I can't think of another time when no one knows what's going to happen, and everybody on a daily basis is heavily restricted and impacted by this global crisis. The aspects I'm going to tap into here and look at, there's three for this next lunar quarter. The Sun will oppose Saturn, 21 July. The Sun will enter Leo on 22 July, and then Mercury will conjoin Sirius on 26 July. First, let's start. Sun opposes Saturn. Like we said, 28 degrees Cancer, 28 degrees Capricorn, that second to last degree. The Moon will be in Leo during this opposition, and the thing here is that the Moon will be carrying Saturn's light, because the Moon also opposed Saturn shortly after the new moon and has not made another aspect to a planet, has not perfected another aspect to a planet. This Venus and Gemini will have an overcoming sextile, and it will overcome the moon, and those will be the only two planets outside of cardinal signs once the moon hits Leo. And so I think you can have this sweet exchange between the moon and Venus here, maybe offsetting some of the heaviness and the cardinal heaviness we had just gone through. If you punch into the ephemeris, the last time the Sun opposed Saturn in these same degrees, this was in 1667, and it was July 1667, and you just pull up Wikipedia here, you have a dreadful hurricane in September of that year, so I'll be watching hurricane season actually pretty closely. That was in Virginia. Brought 12 days of rain. That's wild. And then on the 18th of October in 1667, Brooklyn is chartered. So this is the year of Brooklyn's astrological return, and this is that Sun-Saturn opposition that was experienced in the summer before Brooklyn was founded. And these stories are coming out now. You've seen them all summer. Brooklyn is kind of the center of the clashes that we've seen in New York City. And so I think I'm watching Brooklyn for the rest of this year to see what comes out of Brooklyn. And maybe there will be more symbolic change or shift because of the year correspondence of the Sun-Saturn opposition. The other thing is that the last time you had a partile opposition of a new moon in Cancer to Saturn in Capricorn, and that means it's the same degree of the opposite sign. And it was applying. This was also in 1667. You have some others, but you either had a non-partile opposition or the new moon was separating from Saturn. And so 1667 is a year of great resonance with this current year, 2020. The Sun enters Leo, 22 July, at about 10:30 Central European time. And Venus overcomes via this sweet sextile for the first 15 degrees of the Sun's transit through Leo. And this is the Sun's domicile, right? So the Sun can do solar things. The Sun is strong. The Sun can actualize its significations. Mars is in Aries and overcoming the Sun via trine from Aries. That gives the Sun and the identity of the Sun and the kind of regal quality and feature of the Sun extra power. It'll have Mars supporting it through that easygoing trine. Mars strong in Aries. I think this is some of the best astrology of the summer, actually, with this solar transit through Leo. And we can key in. I'll show you some elections later. But this is the best astrology I think we're going to have of the summer. It's before the Mars stationary retrograde. The Sun is not angular to the nodes. The Sun has no hard aspects to either Mars or Saturn. And Mercury will have a conjunction with the Sun on 17 August. There will be a Mercury in the heart of the Sun perfection, which is always a nice transit with Mercury moving direct. So there's some really nice pockets here. I want to turn to Dane Rudhyar. He's like the king of modern astrologers. Ptolemy and Rudhyar, they're kind of my 1 and 2. He says that the night force is in-gathering energy, so that would be Cancer and the Moon, but the day force is personalizing energy, Leo and the Sun. And so we think of the ego naturally and how the ego is defined against the society at large. The question I would want to ask is, what is my role in the collective? That's the essential Leo question. What is my role in the collective? And you think about Freud here, and so there's these collective expectations that have to be considered and our very bodily lunar needs when we form this identity or this ego, which is the solar Leonian hallmark of that energy. You punch it up in the ephemeris. When was the Sun in Leo, Mars in Aries, and Jupiter in Capricorn last? When did that last happen? It happened in 1830. First, I'll just tell you a little bit about here. Mars enters Aries on 31st July 1830, which is why only for that last 3 weeks of Leo season, or 20 days, do you have Mars in Aries. the sun in Leo and Jupiter in Capricorn all together, like now and like they will be in this Leo season 2020. But Saturn in that period was in Leo as well with the sun, and Saturn was strong there, night triplicity rulership in fire signs, but not making those hard aspects with Mars and not overcoming Mars. So there's a different relationship between Mars and Saturn, but this is very instructive. So there was a July Revolution in France in 1830. And this was when King Charles was overthrown. People were unhappy with the government and the monarch. They overthrew their government. Here it was. So on the day that Mars entered Aries, Philippe, he actually took the crown. So that's when he was, I guess, accepted as king or coronated as king. That was 31 July 1830. So Mars entered Aries in Paris at 8:30 in the evening that night. But then on the 9th of August in Leo season, Mars in Aries, Jupiter in Capricorn, he takes another oath to keep the charter of 1830. So all of this new structure was being installed during this Leo, Mars in Aries, Jupiter and Capricorn lineup that we have now, this resonance. And it spread into Belgium. You see it in Switzerland. It had spread there as well when they started having these assemblies after the July Revolution in France. So there's resonance with our current moment is that we're seeing these stories. So like this is Wired magazine from earlier in the year saying that COVID-19 and living through a new American revolution, maybe, and it's the first revolution like this we've seen in maybe centuries. I talked about this in my last lunar quarter talk, but Serbia just had this amazing moment, right? The government came out and said, all right, curfew. And the people just said no. They went to the streets and there was this violent protest, but the government scrapped the curfew as a result of the citizens saying, look, we're not going to do that. I think this is quintessential Leo. You know, you're figuring out what you can assert vis-a the collective, and there's this push and pull. You know, my identity, I get to say what I like or what I don't like, and you have to then think about how decisions impact others. And so there's this great kind of upheaval that you saw in Serbia, and I imagine this kind of stuff is going to continue all over the world as governments are figuring out how to navigate the crisis and how far they can go and how much pushback they're going to receive. Remember, Leo is identity within the collective, so you're finding your sense of who you are. If the collective doesn't match that identity, then you might need a new system. Right, so I think there's definitely a Leonian feature to revolution. We have these new moons in Cancer, but I like this idea of innovation and the limitations driving innovation. And here I was saying that there's innovations in effective nurturance. There's an innovative feature to Leo, you know, I think, and really an assertion, right? Once we go from Cancer into Leo, once we discover that identity, then we step out with that kind of new self that we've been able to establish. And it's a fixed sign, remember, too. So I think that once we get set in with who we are, then we don't let the outside structures, you know, impinge upon that. Like we're fixed in that self. And that's why I think it could be revolutionary. Because people say, no, I'm not going to budge. I'm not going to negotiate my identity. Mercury conjoining Sirius. I talked about this in a video. My second video on this channel actually was about the Mercury-Sirius mystery of 2020, how there's a triple pass conjunction. So I encourage you to watch that if you're curious about more of the deeper symbolism of the Sirius-Mercury process. But I will just say here, just to take a look at this chart, you know, Mars is overcoming Mercury via an applying square. So I think there's a martial active component to whatever this conjunction is triggering for us. It's also the third and final pass, and I'm wondering if some of the symbolic intensity that we've seen this summer might be finished for now. I think some of that might be ascribed to Mercury and Sirius being so powerfully joined for this longer period. And we saw, and Sirius is really important in the history of America and to occultists, so I think that has driven some of this intensity. There's some benefic activity in this last conjunction between Sirius and Mercury, and the moon will be separating from Mars. As always, look for symbols, look for knowledge, occulted knowledge, intuitive thoughts, intuitive messages. Intuition's so funny, isn't it? It just comes. It's like, all right, I know. Cool, I know this is true. The other thing, I didn't talk about this in my last video, and I regretted it, because the Dogon tribe, this is an ancient African tribe, West African tribe, they have knowledge of the Sirius binary system, and they've had it in their collective myths and the stories they tell for a long, long, long time before science, I mean, so-called science, right? And this is a mystery. It's a huge mystery. And the question is was there transfer to this culture, maybe from non-human visitors? And some people posit extraterrestrial visitors from Sirius. you astrological magicians out there will know this could be, interdimensional or just star knowledge that could be downloaded through ritual. This is from Noah Brosh's Serious Matters, published in 2008. He talks about some claim that the Dogon received their knowledge from visitors. This is one of the cornerstones of New Age beliefs in Sirius. And that's what I focused on more in my other video, but it goes back to this ancient tribe. So let's get down to a few other charts. So first is an election. Remember I told you about the sweet astrology that this is. This is one of my favorite elections. I've been looking at this for months, actually. Young moon in Leo, the ruler is the sun. The moon is young, it's outside of the sun's beams. You can see the moon on the night here on the 22nd. And try to get the moon with the ascendant or the midheaven, closely conjoined to those two angles, angular points, or in the first, 10th, or 11th houses, those strong houses. And remember that the last 6 degrees of Leo are Mars's term, so you may want to try to keep the moon in Mercury's term, which is the term before Mars's term, because you get that sweet mutual reception. Even if you get the moon in those later degrees in Mars's term, Mars is making a trine, so not a hard aspect, and Mars has great dignity in Aries. So you have that support where I always like to have the rulers of the moon having support, at least one, but maybe all of them. But there's all kinds of nuances, your natal chart, maybe there's other things happening, so you might want to seek a consultation with an astrologer or a reading to really hone in on any electional chart. But just generally speaking, this is a really nice election. I love it. I recommend it. This is the 24 July chart, about 10 in the morning, Central European time. The moon will be enclosed between benefic rays. This is a growing Virgo moon. I love a waxing moon for doing things, for expanding things with your action, for wanting to do things that are growing. The moon will have mutual reception with ruler Mercury. Mercury will still be in Cancer here. What I like to do with the moon when it's enclosed between benefics is check out the lunar mansion and just see if there's some kind of lunar mansion activity that maybe I can use to provide a flavor for how I want to use the moment. Even just meditating on the themes of that mansion, if I don't want to take any big action, can be really powerful. And this is the lunar mansion, the 14th lunar mansion. It's called Al-Samak. And it's a mansion that Agrippa says cures the sick. But maybe our health and our immune system can go stronger, right? And we're all needing that right now. But this might be a time to really meditate on your immune system, its health, visualize healing. And then the final chart I want to look at is, this is a more difficult moment. It's not an election of any kind, but it's this T-square with the Mars, Moon, Mercury T-square. And I always like to point out T-squares because they can really, when they're happening, they can be intense. They might be able to explain some of the difficulty, explosions on Twitter, fights with the family. Sometimes it's just, oh, this is this really difficult T-square and it's going to be over soon. And remember, the moon rules Mercury. There's that mutual reception still here. And so it might be listening to the body is how we can navigate this. The body getting tense, is the solar plexus tightening up. Maybe that's a signal, okay, I'm going to step out of the ring here. Cardomancy pull, this is the deceit card, and this is the 5 of hearts, and it's strange because deception is often considered a negative thing, and generally speaking I think it is, but remember Mars rules Scorpio, and so this is that decan of the first decan of Scorpio where Mars has decan rulership as well. Mars is very powerful in these 10 degrees and in these early degrees of Scorpio, and deceit can sometimes be the necessary way to conduct a war or to conduct a conflict or a battle. If in a modern metaphor, any kind of engagement you have, sometimes you can't it's just put all your cards on the table because that would hurt yourself. And so this is the kind of martial, maybe more positive significations of the deceit card. Now, there's also always, too, the kind of deceit that just comes from, the passions overtaking us, right? Sometimes we're deceived by our bodies and what our bodies claim to want, those imperious urges, right? And then we give over to those and maybe do things we didn't want to do and regret later. So there's this kind of deception that can come from the martial significations of passionate physicality. But that's the deceit card. I just encourage everybody transmuting your martial passions, being very strategic, and if you have to engage in that, do it deliberately and consciously. All right, as always, you can book a donation-based astrology reading with me, sjanderson144.com. I look forward to reading for you. This audio can be found on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, your favorite podcast player, so find it there if you prefer. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at sjanderson144.